Now, I do not always know why I do certain things. For instance, back during the Christmas season of 1968, I had hoped to catch up on my personal correspondence. In the mind's eye, at least, I had the month set aside to stop working on the various papers that I was working on and to spend all of my time writing letters. But behind every letter that I attempted to write came a persistent urge to write something else. Well, now, when these urges presented themselves, I stopped working on the letters, and I sat easy, and I let those feelings reveal themselves. The February 1969 notes from Lollygog were the consequence. Words that I literally could not keep from writing, even when Bill was determined to write something else. So, in a small way, this is what I mean by living intuitively. Living intuitively has many advantages. It has us sitting easy and rolling with the punches. It does not belabor the moment, covering it over with clouding plans and calculations. It avoids the disappointments of plans gone awry or calculations falling apart. Living intuitively looks on the now and is capable of enjoying it. Well, of course, to live intuitively doesn't mean that we never make plans. We still make appointments and we keep them. We still serve dinner on time or pay the rent check at the prescribed time. But living intuitively does mean that we stop living by the clock. We stop the incessant planning and calculating, and we relax considerably. You see, there is a happy balance between no planning at all and too much planning. Intuitively living walks a center ground of moderation. Intuitive living is listening attentively to the still small voice. Now, very often in times past, I have spoken of intuitive living as living uninhibitedly, living without restraints and without restrictions. And I guess I have been rightly criticized for that, for saying those things. But I would like to point out again, because I guess it could not be said too many times. To inhibit, you see, means to hold in check. To inhibit means to restrain. To inhibit means to hold back. Well, the real identity is the only identity on the scene. Well, what can be restrained when there is nothing to restrain? What can be held in check when there is nothing to hold in check? Restrain what? Hold what in check? Inhibit what? Do we inhibit a belief of mortal mind? Do we restrain or inhibit or hold back a belief of personal sense? Stop and think about it just a minute. Since when can a belief be checked? How can we check a belief, or restrain a belief, or get rid of a belief? The belief only lasts so long as it is given a place, given a power, an importance, a significance, or seen as something to inhibit or to restrain or to check. Belief lasts just as long as one proclaims its existence. Well, now, this is where we butt heads, you see, with common sense. There is a point at which the truth seems diametrically opposed to the general beliefs that the world operates by. In truth, there is no old man to be put off. There is no mortal mind to be overcome, let alone held in check. And in truth, there is no one to act. That is, there is no actor but the real identity. And this identity acts without attempting to restrain, to restrict, inhibit, overcome, defeat, or do away with false belief. Either God is all and unchallenged, or the devil is real. Mortal mind is real. And if it's real, we can't get rid of it anyway. Consequently, I have found it wise for myself, to act without inhibition, without restraint, without reticence. Well, apparently it seems necessary to say again and again to a certain aspect of myself that would argue about this, that this doesn't mean that we jump out in front of speeding locomotives just because we are suddenly hit with the urge to do it, or that we would strip naked underneath the clock down on 3rd Avenue at high noon just because such an urge as that might hit us. To live uninhibitedly, to live without restraints or personal restrictions, does not mean that we run contrary to, quote, sensible, unquote, intelligent, personal actions that will be condemned by the moral world. Well, now, while this sounds like a contradiction, I would ask that you listen to this with the heart. I might use this analogy to make the point clear. We know that matter is unreal, but we still don't go and stick our hand in a buzzsaw, do we? By the same token, just because we know there is nothing to inhibit us, or nothing for us to inhibit, does not mean that we give vent to the first impulse that the appearing scene might motivate, any more than we would stick our hand into a buzzsaw. The knowledge that matter is unreal doesn't mean that what appears to be matter isn't something. The knowledge that there is nothing to let go doesn't mean that mortal mind or personal sense or ego isn't something. Now, the something that it is a far cry from our old concept about it. And I can assure you that what it really is not something that we are supposed to do battle with. I have found And I might say, just don't worry, because any incorrect actions that anyone makes will be called to his attention immediately by means that will make it very clear what to do about those actions. Now, every mention ever made about living uninhibitedly, whether by me or by anyone else that has seen this joy, that has found the child within the Shekinah, the secret place. Any mention that has ever been made by those about living uninhibitedly, living without restraint, has been coupled with the admonition to find the heart, to listen to the heart, and to run uninhibitedly with that. To look for the child and to run uninhibitedly as that child. For myself, I look for the child I have found myself to be. I find the child and then I run with him. I laugh with him. I sing with him. I look at bullfrogs and listen to crickets and smell new cut grass with him as the child, for the child. And I do this without restraints, without restrictions, without inhibitions. And I still run with the sunshine, and I tell everyone who will listen to me to do the same. But I know how the intellect of us listens to these very words right here and hears something else and shouts what it hears and then tries to live that to its own awful agony, excusing itself for its actions under the pretense that after all God is all, and so therefore I can do this or that or something else. But, you know, even when that mistake is made, and I think that all of us make such mistakes, even that isn't bad, and it isn't, in my opinion, even necessarily to be avoided, because it just seems to be a lesson along the way. We find that we cannot do and use God as a pretext for that doing or as an excuse for that doing. We do not find the balance that the center is, any of us, until we have tried to live both extremes of the imbalance, either on the right or on the left. And I would say that most tightrope walkers, before he can find the balance that walking along that rope requires, falls off to the right, and then he falls off to the left, before he ever finds the balance, the center, which is being all that ever appears to be the extremes of imbalance on either side. We see, finally, that we cannot find the center real while trying to get rid of either of its judgmental imbalances. And really, this is what religion and misunderstood metaphysics has been telling us to do for the past umpteen centuries. And furthermore, when we write about the heart, the center, the child within, we cannot do it honestly without telling others to find the heart and the center and the child and to run with it uninhibitedly. To maintain inhibitions about the allness of God is an act of withholding, producing death, even as it did for Ananias and Sapphira. Not producing a real death, but producing the illusion of it. Intellectual restraints take many forms, but primarily the intellectual restraint let me put it like this. It makes a very powerful cry that this action or that action has led to this or that awful reaction. And that because I did this uninhibitedly, then this terrible calamity has befallen me, and we are very quickly frightened back into line, you see. But for those who have ears to hear, it seems to me that there is a battering barrier which is finally broken. If not now, then later, and if not here, elsewhere, and if not at this time, at another time. We let our guide for action be a guileless, motiveless childlikeness that honors isness as the warp and woof of all being. Let me say that again. We let our guide for action be a guileless, motiveless childlikeness that honors isness, God, reality, is the warp and woof as the entirety of all being. And then we act as we're led to act by this childlikeness, even if those actions are condemned by the intransigent shell of the world, even if those actions appear to be running upstream, contrary to convention or custom. And we act enthusiastically, and we act wholeheartedly, and we act without restraint or restriction, knowing there is nothing erroneous to restrain us, and knowing that there is nothing erroneous to be restrained, not even erroneous personal belief, not even a mortal mind, not even error. Either isnness, allness, reality is unchallenged, or the devil is real. It is not a matter of God is all but. God is all, period. And then we act without restraint, in accord. Well, it looks like all of you have understood. I'm glad. Living intuitively leads to a childlikeness that has us enjoying little things with monumental new enjoyment, almost beyond belief. Another one of my special places is just a simple patch of woods along the river. An ordinary woodland to most folks, but quite special to Ruby and me. Sweet gum and hickory there, Virginia pine, loblolly pine, an occasional willow oak, maybe a few water oaks, and a few scrubby blackjacks here and there. But now these are ordinary trees found in many places. Oh yes, there is one wondrous swamp chestnut oak that overhangs the water's edge. It's just off Old Sweet Gum Trail. It's a trail that's been named for the golden beauty of those trees. The sweet gum turns into a beautiful yellow in the fall. And Old Sweet Gum Trail has yielded a lot more than one arrowhead to Ruby and me as we kick the pine cones there. But it isn't the trail or the chestnut oak or the water oaks or anything else that makes this a special place to me. It's the sassafras tree. A whole big patch of sassafras tree. Now, you know, a sassafras tree is a childlike tree. It's a children among trees. And something just as simple as that is capable of, as the kids say, turning us on. Every time Blue gets his tail washed, he chases the cat. And about the time the tail dries, the cat chases Blue. The other day, Ruby got mad at the cat and washed Blue's tail 25 times. The truth is always timely. Sometimes it doesn't appear why certain things break into consciousness, but in time it becomes clear. Reasons present themselves, and we see why living intuitively is so important. Indeed, when something comes for us to do, we should sit loose and do it, even when the reasons are not completely clear. The heart isn't fooled. We sit loose and make ourselves a clear channel for identity to express itself uninhibitedly. The impression has been left by many teachers that spiritual progress eventually leads one out of the organized church. Is this true? Well, it is true that many teachers who have left the assorted movements teach this. Their experience perhaps indicates to them that it will happen inasmuch as it's happened to them. Have you noticed that the most vitriolic anti-organization statements usually come from the excommunicated? Yet those who have withdrawn voluntarily are not always, it appears, quite so certain that withdrawal is an inexorable sign of spiritual progress. Now, my own experience from those who have visited here indicate that some of the withdrawn still have deep-set mental reservations about what they've done. In fact, some are more disturbed after the withdrawal than before, having unwittingly discovered that the causes of their agony was not the so-called binding organization, after all, but that the causes of their agony were much more the self-concept that gave its appearance of an organization a power to disturb it. You see, one can withdraw from everything on the face of the earth, but there will be no relief until one stops seeing some aspect of himself to condemn. And I assure you that we cannot see anything that is not some aspect of the self we are. Spiritual progress, in quotes, most certainly leads one to let go the binding influences of organization. Now let me say that again. Spiritual progress leads one to let go the binding, constricting influences of organization, but that in itself does not necessarily lead one to drop his name from the membership of that organization or cause him to walk out of its buildings, never to enjoy another service there or sing another hymn. Now listen, the truth of identity allows us to perceive that all appearances of every organization, no matter what they are, present themselves within conscious awareness. That appearance is no more or less than the appearance of trees, clouds, relatives, or governments, or political parties, or philosophies, or ideologies. We awaken to discover that the authority does not lie in the people, places, and things with their rules and regulations, but in the isness being aware of the appearances of authority. That is, the church is an aspect of identity, not something that teaches, guides, rules, or regulates our affairs, even though the appearance out there certainly tries to do these things. That is, the appearance of a church out there very often does attempt to guide, rule, and regulate our personal affairs. But has not the out there always tried to do this? Hasn't the out there always tried to tell us what to do until we stand firm here as the one who has dominion? And God said, let us make man in our image, and let them have dominion over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, and said unto them, have dominion over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. I think that we would have to agree that if anything appears to be a living thing that moveth upon the earth and is spreading out all over the earth, all over the landscape, it would be the institutions and the organizations of mankind. But the interesting paradox lies in the organization's dominion over its membership. That is, mankind joins the organization in order to discover his dominion, only to find that very often he allows the organization to do the dominating. But you see, even this is exactly as it is supposed to be, because how else would we live to know that dominion is ours and not the institutions? Not very far from here there is a little Southern Baptist church, a very small, humble structure with double doors in front and a small steeple above. It was a beautiful little building of simple dignity and grace. That's how it used to be. Now, this little church appealed to so many, it was soon bulging at the seams. So an addition was built. And soon there was an addition to the addition. Shortly afterwards, a new sanctuary was built, and the original little building became the wedding chapel. Well, finally, the larger sanctuary had an addition made to it, and then another, and then another. And they went down into the hollow down below, and down there they built another one, another addition. Well, about this time, the membership got together and decided to do things upright. So they saw what a good thing they had going, and so a vast new building program was announced, and pledges were taken to support it, and architects and structural engineers and giant bulldozers were called in from far and wide. And additional property was purchased for blocks and blocks around. They bought up half the mountain behind, and then work was begun in real earnest. Hundreds of trees were chopped down. Ditches and streams and little valleys were covered over with huge sewer pipes, and then buried and blacktopped and curbed and white-striped. And what was once God's natural sanctuary, running over with singing birds and squirrels and sassy chipmunks and barefoot little boys throwing pine cones at each other, has become it has become a complex of proportions gargantuan enough to house and accommodate the International Olympics, the World Series, and both national political conventions simultaneously. And in a pinch, they can have the Indianapolis 500 in their parking lot. They have a new steeple there that is a structural engineering feat that rivals the Saturn moon rocket. And I suspect that it's probably a guiding beacon for all the air travel between Miami and New York. This particular creeping institution has crept up on, on Mountain Brook and taken it over by surprise.